this video, we're going to look more at working with ggplot. So to start out here, notice I have the module 5.1 script open. Up at the top, I've got the comments that I always have just to remind myself what this script is going to be for. You can find this in the module 5.1 on Canvas. Alright, so like I said, we're going to continue working with ggplot. So remember that ggplot2 is its own separate package, or we could install the TidyVerse package, which contains ggplot2 as well as some other packages we're going to look at later on in the course. So anytime we want to use a package during a new R session, we do have to use the library to call it. Now, just as a reminder, if you haven't used this package before or it's been a while, you might need to install it. So just as a reminder on how to do that, you can go up to Tools, Install Packages, and here we want the TidyVerse. So you click on TidyVerse and click Install. Now mine is giving me this warning because I already have it installed, so I am going to cancel. But if you don't get that, you can go ahead and install it. And then we're going to call it forward using the library function. Alright, so TidyVerse is ready to use, and therefore ggplot is also ready to use. So let's talk a little bit about facets now. So previously, we saw that variables can be added to plots using the AES, or the aesthetic. So for categorical variables, we could also use what are called facets. So to illustrate that, let's look again at that orange data set that we saw last time. So if you'll remember, what we can do to call a data set forward in R is we can use the data function. So here we'll have data orange, and this is just going to tell R, hey, I'm going to use, oops, sorry, let me fix this here. I'm going to use the orange data set, so expect me to do that. And then we can use some different functions to look at that data set. So for example, we could use the head function. We could also check the structure of orange. So notice here, we see that it is a data frame. It has 3 different variables, and we've looked at this data set before. Alright, so previously, if you'll recall, when we looked at the orange data set, what we had was for 5 different types of trees, we had the age and the circumference. And so last time when we made plots, we made a single plot, and we distinguished the points for the different types of trees, or we made lines for the different types of trees, all within a single plot. Using facet, what we can do is actually make a different plot for each of the levels of tree. So looking here, I start out with my ggplot call, and I've got data equals orange. Notice I've got my plus sign afterwards. I'm going to use the geom point just like we did last time, and so you'll notice here I have the mapping, aesthetic, x equals age, y equals circumference. And just as a reminder what this is going to look like, what I'm going to do is just copy this, paste it up above, and let's run this line of code just to remind ourselves what that looked like before. So remember, here's that standard scatter plot. Now what we did last time was we distinguished the different trees using color. This time we're going to add in a third line of code. So notice my second line of code, I'm going to add a plus sign, and then I'm going to use what's called facet wrap. I'm going to have tilde tree, and in row equals to 2. So let's see what this looks like when I add that on. Notice now what R has done is it's taken that scatter plot that we had and it has broken it into separate scatter plots by tree. So for example, here is the data for tree 3, tree 1, tree 2, tree 5. Now looking at our code here, what the tilde is saying is it's saying I want you to do facet by tree. And then the in row tells us how many rows of plots we want. So for example, if we change this to 5, we would now have 5 different rows. You could do 1. It would look like this. So typically you're looking for something that is aesthetically pleasing. All right. So again, very similar to what we did before, it's just now instead of having all of the information separated on a single plot, we've split it as a separate plot for each of the level of tree. All right. We could also look at smooth lines. So again, to start with here, let's look at that scatter plot where we have distinguished the different trees by using colors for the points. Now notice here we use the geom point. Instead, next we're going to use geom smooth. So let's run this and see what this looks like. So notice now instead of the points, we now have lines and we have these gray bands. The gray bands, those are a statistical thing. You can kind of think of those as confidence intervals. They're not really confidence intervals, but they're kind of bands that help us to assess some uncertainty here in that estimated curved line. So this curved line is not going directly through the points. It's kind of a smoothed line that goes through those points. Now, this is not a great way to display this particular data set, and the reason for this is because we have so much overlap and the lines are so close to one another. If you've been following along with that textbook, the textbook has another example of this, and you can see how with different data sets this could be very useful. So, but looking at the geom smooth, notice that we've added line type equals tree. So if you look at the different lines that were used here, notice there's different either dashes or points or solid lines. So that's what that line type is doing. And each one of these represents our 5 different types of trees. So that's another option of how we could visualize this data. Now, one thing that we didn't discuss last time, we looked at it for the base functions but not for ggplot, is how could we change the title or add a title and change the labels. So you'll notice here I have our lines of code that we just ran. I'm going to add on some additional things. Remember, anytime we add something additional, we're going to put a plus sign at the end of the line. And I've got 3 new lines of code: ggtitle, xlab, and ylab. And these are going to do exactly what it sounds like they're going to do. They're going to add in a title, they're going to change the xlab to age, and the ylab to circumference. Now you might say it's already age and circumference here. I'm just doing this for illustration, but do notice that these are capitalized. So when we run all of this, notice age and circumference did change. They're now capitalized, and we now have a nice title. So one thing to note, if we compare the scatter plot to the smooth line call, notice that here we used color with the points and here we use line type. What we include in the aesthetic will depend on what geom function we're using. And that's because we want to have things here that go along with the type of plot. So for example, if you're making a scatter plot and you're using points, it wouldn't really make sense to talk about line type. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, looking at our scatter plot that we had originally, and then looking at that smoothed fitted line, wouldn't it be nice if we could combine these 2 plots? So in other words, for each of these sets of lines, we could have the corresponding points so that we could see that these smooth lines don't lie directly on the points and we'd have more information. Well, remember how ggplot works is it's essentially building these plots using layers. So you can think of adding a bunch of transparent sheets on top of one another until you have built your plot. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that we can combine these, and that's what we're going to see how to do next. Now, before we can do that though, let's take just a closer look at that geom smooth and see what's happening here. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run geom smooth down here, but notice I'm not putting anything in terms of the line type. So the only thing I'm asking for in the aesthetic call is I'm saying x is going to be equal to age and y is equal to circumference. So here what is happening is R is taking all of the data, it's not distinguishing it by type of tree, and it's just fitting a smooth line based off of that scatter plot. So just kind of as a reminder, let's remember what the scatter plot looked like when we made this before. So we're going to use geom point. So here's what the scatter plot looked like when we didn't consider different trees. And so you can see how that line is a smoothed version of these points. So we can think of this as like a trend line. Now you will notice down here as we've been running these, R has been giving us, it's not an error message, it's actually just letting us know that the method it's using to create that line is LOS. That's beyond the scope of this course, but do know there is a method behind how it's creating that fitted line. Alright, so that's how it would make a single line. It just considers all of the data. We could create a line for each of the trees, and there's two different ways that we could do this. We saw the line type up above. Another option would be to use group, and we're going to set group equal to tree here. And we see something similar to what we saw before, except now notice instead of using the different line types, what we've got here in group is different transparencies. Now, one of the downsides to using group is notice that the legend was not auto-populated. So you can use the group option in aesthetic, but sometimes it's better to use one of the other ones because it will auto-populate that legend. So up above, when we looked at the different line types for tree, it auto-populated the legend. We could also look at color instead. So notice here I've added color equals tree. And now this time each of the lines is a different color and we get the legend. Now you'll notice looking at this plot, the choices that it has auto selected probably aren't the best colors, especially if we were going to look at a publication. There are ways to specify, what colors you wanted to use. Alright, so now that we've looked a little bit more at this Geom Smooth, let's now look at how we can create a layered plot where we have our scatter plot and we have the lines. Alright, so to do this, we're going to call both the Geom Point and the Geom Smooth. So the first one we're going to look at is we're going to ignore that we know these are from different trees or different types of trees, and we're just going to treat each observation as being independent. So I'm going to call the GG plot call just like we always do at the beginning to let it know what data set we're using. And then I'm essentially going to use the lines of code that we used earlier. I've got the Geom Point and the Geom Smooth. Now remember that R, again, is building these things in layers. So it's going to build the blank layer first, then it's going to build the points, and then it's going to build the smooth. So if we run this, here is our new plot. And it's a little hard to see, but if we look here, look at the distinction between these 2 points. Let me see if I can make this bigger so you can see this. Notice that this point right here looks a little more gray than this point right here. The reason for this is we put down the point layer first, and then this layer with the line and the shaded region went on last. So it did go on top of some of those, and you can actually see that distinction in the colors. Whereas, let's copy this line of code. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the order of the Geom Point and the Geom Smooth. Again, remembering at the end of the line I need the plus sign, and I don't want that on the last one. So now if we run this, and I make this bigger, we can now see that all of the points are the same color because those points were added on top of the smooth layer. So again, this is one of the reasons it's important to remember that when we use ggplot, it's really layering things. So we can get very similar plots by having things in different orders, but visually we might get something more appealing if we consider the order in which the layers are created. All right. So now we're going to look at all the points. We're going to base the color based on tree, but still just fit a single line. And the difference here, if you'll remember last time, we talked about how we could put some of the aesthetics up into the ggplot call, and so that's what we've done here. And so here's our new plot. So again, notice we've distinguished the different lines, but we're still just doing a single trend line for all of the trees. And then finally, really probably what we want is we want a separate line for each type of tree. So again, here, since I'm going to be using the same aesthetic for both the Geom Point and the Geom Smooth, I've just put it into the ggplot call. And so that's why when we call Geom Point and Geom Smooth, They don't have anything in them because again we've put the mapping up in the ggplot call. So we can run this. And notice if I make this larger, if we look at how we built this, we had the points first and then the smooth. We can see the points are there, but they're very, very hard to see. So notice there's some points here, 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 and so on. But I mean, they're incredibly hard to see. And the reason for this is the smooth layer was the last layer we constructed, and so it's hiding the points. So what we're going to do instead is I've just reversed the order. So we do the smooth first and then the points. And now notice we get a much better looking plot. Now again, with the geom smooth here, including those boundaries, these error boundaries, it's not that informative with this plot because there is such an overlap with these lines. So this is more for illustration than necessarily something that I would use in publication. Now if I were trying to make the point that the error bounds all overlapped each other, then I would use this, but just something to keep in mind. So this is going to end this video. Of course, if you ever have any questions, please just let me know.